But I'm glad you brought up the issue of U.S. hegemony, because we want to turn to the issue of Latin America, where, of course, U.S. hegemony has been massively challenged since Hugo Chavez's election in 1998 in Venezuela. But, of course, Colombia, the Israel of Latin America, has remained as the cornerstone of these hard-right, neoliberal, racist politics in Latin America. But perhaps things could be headed for a change in Colombia, and we are very happy to be joined yet again by friend of the show, fantastic journalist, co-editor of People's Dispatch, Zoe Alexandra. Welcome, Zoe.
Great to be back here, as always.
Well, the pleasure is all ours, if you will.
Eugene.
I don't really get that joke, to be honest.
I'm going to keep making that. I don't care. All right. It is a pleasure.
I'll fill you in. I'll fill you in.
A lot happening in Colombia, of course. Let me not assume that people know. Maybe let's start here. Obviously there's primary-ish elections. We're now in the official campaign for elections for president, but there's, I think, other activity going on. Give us just a sense of what the political scene is like there, and when these next elections are and what people should be looking for.
Definitely. So 2 weeks back, the first round of the kind of electoral process in Colombia was held, legislative elections and the primary elections for the different political coalitions. And so in this, people were able to vote for who's going to represent them in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and also who they wanted for, within each coalition, who would be the presidential and vice presidential candidates. This also kind of serves as a litmus test of how much support that these coalitions have. Many people drop out after this first round as presidential candidates, seeing if they don't have enough votes. They join to other coalitions. So it's a really important moment. And in this first electoral phase, a surprising new, well, not really surprising, but a new electoral force was one of kind of the stars of this day, which is the Historical Pact. This is a progressive alliance, a coalition of many different parties in Colombia, led by presidential candidate Gustavo Petro. He is a longtime political activist in Colombia. He was active with the 19M movement, which was an armed movement in Colombia in the urban centers. He then, with the transition, with the demobilization of this group, he entered institutional politics, was active in the legislative realm. He was the mayor of Bogota. He's been a senator for the last several years, and he really has galvanized left forces and progressive forces in Colombia that have long been divided, that have long been, suffering campaigns of persecution. Gustavo Petro has emerged as the front runner, and in these, in this primary election, he, received millions of votes. He's going to be the presidential candidate of the Historic Pact, and the Historic Pact not only got a large number of seats in the Senate and the Congress, but also had a really strong showing in these primary elections, and it looks like they are, leading the voter intention and voter support for the upcoming presidential elections, the first round, which will be held in May. And if one candidate does not get over 50% of the votes, they will go to a second round in June, and then it will be between the top two candidates.
Mm-hmm. Well, one other notable aspect, that I just want to get to here that I was hoping you could speak to about the primary is the emergence of Francia Márquez as the running mate of Petro, which is also quite historic.
Yeah, Francia Márquez was the second runner-up in this internal primary of the Historic Pact. She is an Afro-Colombian land defender, activist, human rights defender, an incredible person who's really been in the struggle for decades. She comes from a region of Colombia that's one of the most affected by violence, Cauca. She was really active in her community in resisting an illegal mining project. She walked all the way from her town in Cauca to Bogota, demanding that the authorities take action for the destruction that was happening of her community, the assassination of people in her community. She has long been, active in Colombia's diverse and plural social movements. And she's really emerged as kind of the representation of these movements that have so long been shut out of institutional politics, that have been annihilated, assassinated, repressed, persecuted. And it's giving a lot of incredible energy, really. I mean, people that have been so sidelined, historically for decades, for centuries, really, Afro-Colombian communities that have been so oppressed and so marginalized. And to see that a woman like Francia Márquez, who comes from Cauca, who's an Afro-Colombian woman who fights for the rights of Afro-descendant communities in Colombia and across the continent, is now the front runner in these presidential elections is incredibly historic. I mean, the historic pact in its name, it's not a lie, it is historic. It's bringing together so many sections of the left, so many sections of Colombia's movements, of the society, and it really stands a strong chance in these upcoming elections.
Zoe, in Colombia is this country that is so deeply connected to the U.S. in terms of its security apparatus. I mean, even more than that, but the U.S. basically trains its armed forces, its police, which are known to be incredibly violent. There's a lot of killings of activists that we hear about taking place in Colombia on a regular basis. So I'm just curious, in terms of the safety of these people, is there a danger in the kinds of rise of these figures in a place like Colombia, where we do see a lot of violence, not just, of course, like the killings of activists, but also, we saw there was an uprising in Colombia not too long ago, and the reaction to that uprising was quite violent. So what could be the backlash to figures like this gaining ground in a place like Colombia?
I mean, already we've seen it. So Francia Márquez was only confirmed as the vice presidential candidate, in the past week. And since then, there has been an onslaught of threats against her. She's received several death threats. And, this is not new for her. I mean, essentially, if you enter into activism in Colombia, you almost expect to get death threats. And especially if you are a prominent voice. She's received several from the group Águilas Negras, which in recent years has been kind of ubiquitous. Anytime there's a movement, an uprising, the Águilas Negras will release a statement threatening, many, many prominent people of death. She's received horrific, slandering campaigns on social media, in actually mainstream media, Colombian media, racist statements, horrible, horrible things. And I think people are really worried about their safety. She's personally asked President Iván Duque that he has to take action to ensure her safety. I mean, right now, the fact that on Twitter it's almost trending, the hashtag "Don't Kill Petro," really speaks to the fact that, there's a real danger here. I mean, there is precedent for this. The member of M19 who was going to run for president after the demobilization was assassinated. He was the presidential candidate, Carlos Pizarro León Gómez. He was very popular. He was coming out of this demobilized guerrilla group, and he was assassinated. There's a lot of precedent for this happening in Colombia. That being said, of course, this is not the 1990s anymore. It would be, hopefully this is not something that will happen. Hopefully Iván Duque will actually take measures to ensure their safety. They, of course, have many different security frameworks, but I think the fact that this is even happening, the fact that presidential candidate, vice presidential candidate is under such threats is really concerning, and speaks to the fact that being a social leader, being a human rights defender in a country like Colombia means that your life is constantly in danger, and not just from online trolls, but people who actually could come to your house and kill you, like has happened to so many people in Colombia.
Mm-hmm. Most trade unionists killed of any country on earth regularly, year after year. Well, I think this is a good sort of segue into, I think, an important issue is, were Petro and Márquez able to be successful? What are some of their policies around certainly the peace process, but what are some of the other things that they're proposing, and what would that mean for the nation of Colombia?
So, as Colombia being Latin America's Israel, it has, not only is it dangerous to be an activist, but the whole setup of society is really, made in order to favor the elites and exclude the majorities. So, for example, access to healthcare is extremely challenging in Colombia. There was a law passed during the presidency of Álvaro Uribe Vélez, which essentially privatized many of the health services. So millions are left without healthcare. There's a famous kind of like urban legend of people dying in the doors of the hospital because they're unable to get healthcare. So one major point of their platform is ensuring healthcare, nationalizing healthcare, access to education. So when Petro was mayor of Bogota, one of the principal axes of his time as mayor was, democratizing access to education. He worked a lot with the homeless communities in Bogota. He worked a lot with these marginalized communities. People had not been able to have access to education, and ensuring they were able to enroll in adult education programs. And in Colombia, again, the higher education is extremely expensive. It's extremely inaccessible. People are now forced to take out huge loans or try to get lucky enough to get some insane scholarship. But democratizing access to education, housing, of course, is another huge issue. So all of these essential rights are key tenets of the platform. And then, even looking at the energy sector, Colombia is, like its neighbor Venezuela, a huge exporter of oil. It has vast reserves of oil, and this has been to its detriment. It's a country that has over 40% of its territory in concessions to mining companies, to oil companies, and none of this wealth, none of this mineral wealth, none of this natural resource wealth has actually benefited the communities. It's a very popular country to invest in and to have mining projects in because of precisely the legal framework that makes these companies able to take out these resources, not pay royalties, not have to have any sort of accountability to the communities. There's so much you could say more about their collusion also with paramilitary groups, but the essential fact that these resources have never benefited the people, have never been put into actually strengthening the state. And so Petro wants, one of his central proposals is moving away from this resource extraction economy and pushing towards agriculture. Colombia is one of the countries with, extremely rich soil. You can grow literally anything there. I've seen fruits I've never even seen in my entire life. And so he really wants to focus on this strength of the Colombian economy. There's a major challenge in rural communities is that over the past several decades, because of free trade agreements, because of the violence, because of the drug war, they've been forced to not grow vegetables, fruits, and other things that would sustain their communities and actually have kind of a positive effect, but they've been forced to grow coca crops, they've been forced to grow drugs. And so trying to address both this problem of national economic development and also strengthening of these rural communities that throughout the 6 decades of the Colombian armed conflict have been so marginalized, have been so persecuted, and today continue to face the threats to their survival because of neoliberalism, because of all of these different policies against them.
Mm-hmm. And Zoe, not to make everything about Ukraine, but I think just to kind of go full circle here, I think it would be interesting just to know what is the, you pay attention to like the Colombian media and what people in Colombia are talking about. And Colombia is a very close state to the US. That said, it's not like they've taken an extreme position against Russia, as far as I know, in this war on Ukraine. And I'm curious about how that war is playing out, at least in the way it's being discussed in a country like Colombia that is very much aligned with the US, but isn't necessarily trying to antagonize Russia as far as I know. Again, I could be very wrong about that.
Well, Colombia is a global partner of NATO, is actually the first of its kind to have this kind of relationship with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And I say the full name because Colombia, of course, is not in the North Atlantic, but it is part of this NATO global expansion. And so I think in the sense that, of course, Colombia doesn't really have that much to send like European countries. They're not going to be having this more direct relationship, but of course they fall in lockstep with the NATO orientations, also by virtue of being a global NATO partner. I think there's a lot of attention right now on the elections, and a lot of the mainstream media coverage right now has really been focused on demonizing Petro. They like to make a lot of loose kind of allegations. So you have here on one hand, Russia, USSR, communist, terrorist, Petro. So a lot of that. There's a lot of, these kind of loose word games. But I think, of course, anything that can be weaponized to stigmatize the left, say that the progressive ticket is not a good choice for Colombia is definitely being done. So all those kind of conservative talking heads definitely weaponizing the situation to further their own goals and to say that, Colombia supports Ukraine and someone like Gustavo Petro is in bed with, the USSR, which of course is not factually, accurate at all.
Well, also doesn't exist anymore. I mean, there's also the fact that the USSR no longer exists.
It's all whatever, everything they can get in there. I'm sure the Castro Chavismo is coming back, but Zoe, it does remind me a little bit of, I guess, every election now in Latin America, but, in Mexico in 2018, which was also sort of a major changeover in terms of the traditional politics and sort of a new era. We've seen Chile, obviously, with the recent election there. Perhaps we will see in Brazil the return of former President Lula. I mean, given you were there in Honduras, of course, as well, it's obviously a huge win for the left. I mean, give us a sense of what it would mean for Petro to succeed in Colombia, for the region, and maybe what that means for the world. Well, I'll just leave it there.
Well, I think, starting off first with the most local level, which is what it would mean for Colombia. I mean, even the symbolic victory of Francia Márquez and Gustavo Petro triumphing in the country that has been ruled by the elites and the oligarchs for 60 years. I mean, in Colombia, you never had a Plan Condor coup because the left was never able to gain power, was never able to break this kind of lock that the oligarchies always had on institutional politics in the country. It would be huge. I mean, imagine a country that would have friendly relations with Venezuela, that would not be allowing paramilitaries to train for, magnicides to happen there, for invasions of the neighboring country to happen. We're definitely seeing this progressive wave, this progressive tide. I think we've talked about it before, and this opens up many opportunities for, more interdependence within the region. If Brazil, which is the largest country in Latin America and has over, almost nearly 300 million people, were also to, win a progressive government, I think we're looking at a very different scenario. It's hard to imagine how the U.S. Would respond to this scenario, but I think we've seen in some of the cases that with these, less Venezuela-style governments, these are not victories of socialist parties. These are not victories that are, really, really challenging the structure of capitalism. I mean, Gustavo Petro will say, I am not anti-capitalist. He is not going to challenge the underlying economic structure in a serious way. And so I think, for example, after Xiomara Castro won, instead of contesting her victory, the U.S. knew it was more strategic to try to immediately make friends with her. And, to what extent they've been able to influence Honduran policy to the moment is unclear. I think we're going to see in the coming months and years, like how they're going to reconfigure their response to a region that's, of course, tired of neoliberalism, tired of hardline conservatism. And how will they respond to these progressive governments? I think, Gabriel Boric not inviting Venezuela, not inviting Cuba to his inauguration. I think I'm willing I'm hoping that, a Gustavo Petro, Francia Márquez government would be much more friendly, especially I think the element that Francia Márquez is in this coalition is that she's representing the voices of the movements. This is not the same as Boric. This is not the same as, other victories, because she really does come from the movement. She's coming from the communities, representing these voices. And that's, that will be really, really strong as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Zoe, as always, really appreciate you giving us some of your time. And of course, People's Dispatch, I could not recommend it any more highly. And of course, at 11 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, Friday, give the people what they want. Do I have the time wrong?
AM.
What'd I say, PM? Yeah, whatever, it's on YouTube. Really, you can watch it whenever you want. Zoe, VJ, Prasan, you do a great job every single week breaking down all the things you need to be hearing and talking about, and everything was on the world, really. 11 a.m., p.m., noon, whatever. Friday morning, it's there. It's on YouTube. You should watch it whenever you can. Thank you, Zoe.
Thanks
I appreciate
so much
you
for having
joining
me.
us.
Great to speak with you both.